to create disunity and splits in its ranks.
Azimio is splitting. Azimio is convening meetings which have not been held, and so on and so forth. That is all trash.
We agreed that the coalition is only as strong as its constituent parties.
Unity is an achievement the coalition will guard jealously to be able to continue fighting for Kenyans.
Azimio remains extremely disturbed by the worsening cost of living, the ever-rising and reckless taxes by Zakayo, the collapsing national currency, the chaos in the education sector, the tribalism in public service, and the return of mega corruption.
Iko shida mingi sana. Hata watu wanakosa chakula kwa sababu tumerundikisiwa ushuru chungu zima.
Just like the donkey spoke to Balaam in the Bible, the donkey is now telling Zakayo, enough is enough.
Na mimi nataka kuomba Rais wa Kenya William Ruto. Mahakama imesema sheria si kihalali. Tafadhali heshimu sheria kwa sababu wewe ulikula kiapo ukasema you will work under the rule of law.
We will never discuss the merit of a case. That will be determined by the judge based on the evidence, based on the law, and based on their own understanding.
Wale wakora wako kotini tunyoroshane na wao ama tuwaache wanyoroshwe.
Democracy all over the world is under attack. But this reminds me, this is why we should be more vigilant and more defensive of the independence of the judiciary.
Wanyoroshwe. Housing iendelee.
Even when we open ourselves up to dialogue, one thing we will not open ourselves to is our decision-making independence.
Zile manyumba ambazo zinajengwa hakuna hata moja itasimama.
Wameze wembe, wapende wasipende, affordable housing inaendelea.
Agenda ya kwanza, bunge ikifunguliwa, tunaenda kupitisha sheria ndio watoto wetu waweze kupata kazi na waweze hii program ya rais iziweze kuangushwa na judiciary.
Wakati wanarudi tarehe 12 kule bungeni, within 1 week watamaliza hiyo sheria affordable housing. We comply with it, what the court wants. Watume katika Senate na sisi katika chini ya mwezi moja tutamalizana na hiyo sheria, vijana warudi kazi na tujenge nchi yetu.
Housing, the concept itself is a good concept, but how to operate it, to make it operational, is where the challenge is. And I believe they need to go back to the people to see what they want. They need to repackage it. They need to follow orders of the judiciary. They must follow orders of the judiciary. Orders are orders. Otherwise, we run into anarchy. Court orders are done and nobody follows them.
We are ready as a judiciary to open ourselves for this introspection and to see who is failing in their duty.
Azimio stands for the rule of law and supports the need for an independent and professional judiciary. Subsequently, we demand that the Kenya Kwanza regime must keep its hands off the judiciary.
We agree with the decision of the High Court, of the Superior Court, that we need to amend a few things, which we must do in the next 1 month. Now, housing agenda will go forward.
The housing levy is a tax. Tuko na railway levy, tuko na IDF, tuko na roads maintenance levy. Kwani housing levy inanuka kuliko zile levy zingine?
So hata kama walishasimamisha, hiyo tu ni kwa sababu wako kazini. Lakini sisi hatujasimama, tunaendelea na kazi, kesi baadaye. Kama watakuja kutufunga kwa sababu tuliandika vijana kazi, shauri yao.
I am glad the Chief Justice had a conversation with the President Juicy, and that conversation should continue, because a nation that speaks, that sits together on the table, can easily agree on the direction they are going to take.
Executive ifanye kazi yake, judiciary ifanye kazi yake, parliament ifanye kazi yake.
Na tungeomba makanisa na wale wengine wakuu wa makanisa, kama iko jambo lolote wanaweza kufanya ili tuone hiyo mauano ikiwa pamoja, kwa sababu sasa ile mahakama inaleta sheria nyingine, sheria zile zinasimamisha
maendeleo ya serikali kuu. Hiyo inahadamisha maisha ya wananchi.
Judiciary is an independent body. Independent body aji wanafanya kazi yao independently. Now executive ifanye kazi yake. Waache kuingilia koti.
All right, those are just the political tone and tenor that we had over the housing, the cost of living, the intactness of, so to speak, of Azimio. And we want now to just put up tails on where the president was, where the president has wound up his Italy trip, with a clarion call to European nations to tap into the immense green energy and agricultural potential in the African continent. The head of state, who also attended the European Corporate Council on Africa and the Middle East dinner on the sidelines of the Italy-Africa Summit, said Africa remains the future of the world in terms of development. The president also held a meeting with the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgio Meloni, and the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, in a bid to get partnerships to eradicate hunger in Kenya.
Africa has the largest renewable energy assets in the world. Number two, Africa has 2/3 of the world's arable land for agricultural production. Number three, Africa has the youngest population, 70% below the age of 30. And number four, Africa has the world's critical minerals that are necessary for energy transition. So if you are looking at the future and you're not looking in the direction of Africa, then I want to tell you, you are looking in the wrong place. Yes. The future is in Africa.
The future is in Africa. Let's talk about this particular tour. Dr. Hassan Kanenje, we can begin with you. Previously, we've seen the president really castigating the Western or the West, really talking about how we herded like cows and livestock into one bus going into. If the summit is for Africa, then they should come to Africa. We should have had the Prime Minister of Italy coming here and sitting with the delegates, the 20 head of state, instead of them really going to Italy. He's spoken that before. Is he speaking from both sides of the mouth? Because he's actually gone and is accented to the invitation.
First of all, I would like to say that President made a quote for quote. That was a very good phraseology, the way he concluded with what Africa can provide. And if you're looking anywhere else around Africa, then you're looking the wrong direction. I think it enhances his Pan-Africanist credentials and as someone who is advocating for the continent. Now, with regard to the visit to Rome, and I would let the president address those kind of contradictions. He's a leader and the president of a country and representing not just Kenya, but a lot of times going to represent the continent too. And so I would not go into the his psychoanalysis to try and find out what he's doing, but those are the contradictions that he's best placed to address, and they're way beyond my pay grade. Perhaps can let the politician do that.
Maybe. All right, he's trying to keep his powder dry. As you know
no,
it.
I think in there, if you looked at it on the surface, there's a bit of contradiction. But if you looked at it a bit deeper, there isn't, and I will tell you how. You see, in the emerging President Ruto's foreign policy, which he seems to drive himself, he has had a very good time with the West, from Washington to London, from London to now Rome, from Rome to Bari and many others. He is very welcome in the Western capital cities and palaces and citadels of government. And the West has become the defining face of the president's foreign policy. I was not overly surprised that from the region, he was actually the only president in this Italy Africa summit, because that is where he's really very much at home, you know, in his foreign policy. Yes, we see him and begin to understand that for our president, never again is not never again, in a way. And he comes across as a very pragmatic individual, because what you say today, you can change it tomorrow if it doesn't serve your interests. But then what that does to his posture as a politician is something that we can have a conversation on another day. But with the West, I foresee that I see that the president has maintained quite a bit of consistency in terms of the influence different countries of the West are exercising here at home, and the role they are playing in his administration. So you know, the old adage still holds: he who pays the piper calls the tune. The global north is really driving us, and when they call, our president must respond in some way. He talks, and Hassan mentioned it, as a Pan-Africanist. The future is Africa. He has highlighted the demographic dividend that we have hyped about in Africa. But the irony is that many African countries are actually not harnessing that demographic dividend that we have compared to many other countries in the world. Here at home, we are talking about taking our people literally as slaves, like it did in the time of slave trade. You know, slavery by any other name or means still remains slavery, because the kind of people we are sending out, they are literally going to work in the lowest cadres, farm labor, you know, guards, caregivers, and all that. What we need, in my view, if we want to talk about taking our people outside, is to take people who will help us either in the remittances that Mheshimiwa talked about, or in skills transfer, with the hope that when they finally come, they will be more equipped to help us develop. If, for example, you have read a little bit about the modernization of Japan from the Meiji era of the 1860s, that is how Japan started doing its thing, by taking some of its very best students to Western medieval universities and telling them to watch them and see what these guys are doing that has made them to move forward very fast. And then thereafter come home and do the same thing, skills transfer. If you compare us, for example, with other countries in the global south, India has featured around this table this morning. Much as you say, they also export farm laborers and guards and all that, but they are known for computer technicians, scientists, and all that.
Right. So I wanted also to comment on regarding this global tour right now, because everyone is really also centering on why the president is actually outside. We're using a lot of resources, and we know the economy is really tanking right now. We should pare down. He should actually lead by example. This is his 48th tour. He's been very categorical before that he will not be part of this particular tours because of how also the treatment of delegates there, especially the African head of state, are treated. The Russia summit has been there before. We've seen also, was it the G20? No, not the G20. No.
The BRICS.
The BRICS, yeah, the BRICS as well. So is he, that's the question I'm asking, is he speaking from the double side of his mouth?
Not really. I think the president is the #1 ambassador. He's our global representative. And he may have meant it well when he said that some of these conferences are not necessary and they are demeaning.
Yeah.
And he's correct in that sense. But they're a necessary problem because at one point he said that this particular job should be left for the African Union chairperson. But the African Union can deal with multilateral issues that deal with countries and continents. But Kenya has its own national interest, and it needs to engage bilaterally. And these global meetings provide an opportunity for the president to be able to meet face-to-face, one-to-one on the sidelines with leaders from other countries. So I think it is absolutely necessary for our diplomacy and for our projection of interest in the world, for our president to be at the most important international gatherings, Africa meetings that bring Africa and developing countries together. We cannot miss from those meetings, despite the fact that, in fact, there is an imbalance in terms of the power relationship, in the sense that, in fact, we need those countries more than they need us to a certain extent as we speak. And I think the president is a very practical, very pragmatic person. And I've mentioned at one time that when you look at the philosophy of the Chinese leader, the famous Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, who said that it doesn't matter the color of the cat as long as it catches the rat. So he has exceptional diplomatic skills. I don't think we've had a president who is that outgoing and that articulate. He speaks out for Africa at all these gatherings, and he's championing climate justice, the campaign for climate justice. This is something no other African leader has done before, or no, to a certain extent, no leader in the world has that kind of expertise and push and passion in pushing for climate justice. He's also he constantly advocates for equitable solutions. He's pushing for Kenya and Africa's interest. And then he's putting climate change in the Africa and the global agenda. And if you look at it, a lot of people do not know about Africa. You know, when he says, for example, it is the largest renewable resource place in the world. 2/3 of the African land, 2/3 of the arable land is found in Africa. The youngest population, 70%. And also the fact that, in fact, Africa is home to all the world's mineral, critical or strategic mineral resources. He's right in all of this. And what is needed at the lower level in Africa, in African countries, is to push this agenda collectively in the whole of Africa. But I think there is a problem in the sense that Africans do not support each other. President Ruto seems to be on his own pushing these issues at the global level. But I think the president needs to go to these places. The president needs to represent us. He is our #1 ambassador. And we get a lot of benefits. You know, people are looking for instant gratification or instant results. That does not happen in global diplomacy. You build relations over time, over period. You repeat it all the time. But we cannot be missing from the table in many of these important gatherings. You know, this year, for example, one of the largest gatherings that is coming up is the China-Africa Summit towards the end of this year. We have to be there. If it is happening in any other part of the world, we have to be there. And who best can represent us? We have a very articulate, well-informed, well-focused president on the issue of climate change and equity and economic equity and justice. And we should take advantage of that to the fullest extent that we can do.
All right, Professor Kagonja.
I think my friends, colleagues are pulling punches. They know foreign policy and they know consistency. So we don't want to pose as radicals, but we want to pose as people who can state it as it is. Because there's a stark difference between the policy that you found with Kibaki and Uhuru and the policy you're finding with Ruto. And there's a lot of writings in the Jomo Kenyatta library and all the libraries we have if you don't go to the internet. There is something called, our own scholar Ali Mazrui called Euro-Africanism. And there is something called Pan-Africanism. These are two different concepts, right? Ali Mazrui spoke about Euro-Africanism, meaning the Pan-European, Pan-African merged together produces Euro-Africanism. Pan-Africanism means common African interests. That's what we call Pan-Africanism, which is the foundation of the AU. So our foreign policy has, shifted to the West. There's no doubt about that. If you do an analysis of the trips, out of the 48 trips, about 30 or so, I've done them. They're also in Wikipedia. Luckily, somebody, the Wikipedia somehow was interested in these trips, and they have documented the dates, the hours, and the minutes of this. Now, the issue where I support the president myself is when it comes to our national interests. Because Kenya is a country, and in global business, it is our national interest that matters. So going to Italy is in our interest because we need to forge a one-on-one relationship with Italy. Going to America is important. Going to China was ultimately important, even though you have moved to the West. Why? Because China is our greatest, source of development assistance. It is our topmost trading partner. It is our main source of technology, and currently it is the main direction for our student trainees, particularly on technological issues. If is a Kenyan student studying nuclear, then it's most likely that you are finding them in the Chinese universities. Now, therefore, we are trying to say there is difference between what you do and what you say. And that's the point I wanted to make. If you know you're shifting, then you go quietly because you might be judged by what you say, right? So in January, I think last year, there was the Russia-Africa summit. Why didn't we go? Because it is not useful for the Africans heads of state to be hoarded the way we were done in the Queen's, funeral and all that. So that rhetoric went down, and there was a policy recommendation that I thought was really becoming very popular, that the African Union should represent us in the GA, in all these summits, so that we spend more time in development. That was the argument. But that seems not to have held water, because we are moving to every other summit except the Russian one. So you use a bigger argument to justify a small issue, and I think it was important just to keep it hush. The same case happened to when we had the Russian-China summit, because BRICS is largely driven by Russia, China, and India. These are the main drivers of this particular summit, and therefore we sent a low-level representation. We were not absent, but we sent low-level representation. So the point one is trying to make is that we need to recognize that we have made a foreign policy shift. We're moving to the West. And we need we seem to be saying that our interests are better merged with those of the West. At the same time, we also seem to say that we have some interest in the East. But in terms of every forum in the West, you expect us to be there, because that's where our interests are. And that's where we need to state it. And therefore, it is not Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is a very different animal. The Pan-Africanism you find is what South Africa is doing, because South Africa is getting bonga points on every account because of its position on the Middle East, particularly the Palestinian-Israeli war. It's winning.
It has won a lot in the International Criminal Court of Justice, if you have been following that. But for us, currently under the Kenya Kwanza government, we are, strictly Western. Our interests are merged with those of the West. That's it, full stop. Now, if we are going to the East where we think we have interest, but we are also tiptoeing, we are not really walking with heavy foot, heavy feet. We are tiptoeing. And therefore, I would urge that at this time when you're making transition, pronouncements that might look contradictory is what essentially is dangerous to our foreign policy. Because foreign policy hates one thing, inconsistency. It hits because it is an arena that deals with principles. That's why there are treaties, there are agreements, there are bilateral this, multilateral this, because you want to be judged from a certain principle point of view. So you cannot speak from the two sides of your mouth and still be at the same time.
So the
and
question,
yes.
I think what Professor is trying to say is that consistency is the currency of credibility in foreign policy and international diplomacy.
Yep.
And the moment you veer from that, you lose all credibility and your impact becomes limited.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. And what I wanted to say, so when you're making this pronouncement, is it just for political posturing that you want to be the Pan-African figure? Is it to banish also your own image at the end of the day?
But we have come from far, because we had the 60s when we had the Casablanca and Monrovia group of Pan-Africanists. And we knew who was speaking for Africa and who was speaking for Europe. And that's where our own Ali Mazrui came to differentiate between those who are speaking for Africa, he called them Pan-Africanists, and those who are speaking for Euro-Africa. Basically the continuation of the kind of relationship. They define it in sanitized terms as, historical relationship between us and Europe or the West. And there are some people like Nkrumah, Nyerere, and others who are feeling that we need to do a sharp break and assert ourselves. Now, today, when you say you are for climate summit, and I like the way Mheshimiwa is branding this as the Kenyan thing, it is making us look very bad on the continent, because this is the continent that has the largest resources of these minerals. Tanzania has oil and gas. South Africa has oil and gas. The other countries have oil and gas. When we say we want a petrol-free, or whatever you call the fossil fuel-free kind of economy, what are you telling South Africa? That's why most African countries did not attend the African summit here in Nairobi, because we had not resolved the question of how do we move into the future. This is an argument we'll have in another forum, but for now we can say even the policies that we push will also tell whether we are Pan-African or we are not. Yes. Because if you're pushing a policy that does not allow, for example, that exonerates the West to go on using their coal and oil and gas and whatever they want to use to pollute the environment, as long as they pay for, whatever compensation in whichever form. And now you're telling the Africans to leave their oil and gas down there, not exploit it, and you're not offering a solution, just because us as a Kenyan economy, we can survive without oil, and we have survived without oil. We have hydro energy and so on. But sympathize with other Pan-African countries, like Tanzania, which may not have that and have large, huge oil resources. What does that mean for our relationship with that? What does it mean for our relationship with Uganda, which is looking for its future in terms of exploitation of its oil? So again, when you speak Pan-African, you take the aggregate total of African interests and then merge them with our own interests. Then you become a Pan-Africanist. But if you merge the interests of the West and those of your countries, then you are an Euro-Africanist. You're not a Pan-Africanist, you're a Euro-Africanist. So those are two concepts.
All right, because the double speak that we're talking, we had also quoted from Bloomberg that President William Ruto said African countries need to be able to tap all their energies and resources, even if that means developing non-renewable source of fuel. And we've had that particular debate before, where it seems that he's also supporting fossil fuel
Yeah.
when it comes to Saudi Arabia and some of its jurisdiction. And when you're talking about Europe, generally, we can see Europe is gravitating back to fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen Olaf also just recently in Nigeria trying to re-establish on how they're going to tap the oil market.
But that's not a shortage. There is no shortage of it. It's just the politics of Europe vis-a-vis Russia.
Yeah.
Russia is the world's one of the world's largest producers.
But the question we wanted to ask,
Germany
can I just finish
was supplied by Russia.
Indeed.
But for political reasons, decided to cut that supply.
Yeah, because
So
I think almost 80% of their gas was really coming from Russia.
But what is the problem with that? There's no problem with that.
There's no problem. But what I'm
they've
saying,
created a global energy crisis just because they want to sanction Russia. That's the problem. There is enough supplies for everybody to go along. They now want to come to other countries far away from Russia in order to replace Russia's supplies. So that's a political decision, not a supply problem.
Indeed. But I think also with that particular war that has really been ongoing now for almost, it's heading into 2 years here, has raised the soft underbelly of the European countries that they've realized so far they've been heavily relying.
But Debal, that's an American perspective. It is not really...
no, it's the issue of the climate change, because climate change also is becoming a very big captive issue.
America wants to isolate Russia, and it has convinced Europe to damage its economy by cutting off supplies from Russia. And that's why there is an economic crisis in Europe. And that's why Germany is in a free fall economically, because the cheap energy supply it used to get from Russia is no longer there. And it has not been able to find an alternative source.
I think there's something Dibali is saying, and we seem to be running away from it. And he's asking a very simple question. Is His Excellency, our President, talking from both sides of the mouth? What you need to recognize, Dibali, is that having inconsistency is consistency in itself, in some way. Our President is young, agile, passionate, and fast. And he seems to have views and opinions on a number of issues that appease and annoy depending on which side you are. He's talking, whether he's talking what Prof is calling Africanist or Pan-Africanist in Europe. He has been very consistent in that. And let's give it to him on that one. So there is some level of consistency in that which we see as inconsistency. And that has repercussions, both positive and negative. Look at for the past 1 month that we are closing now, the kind of interesting relationship we have had with Kampala, Khartoum, Dar es Salaam, the Battle of the Skies, the battle over the pipeline with Kampala. We had a run-in with Kigali. We had a run-in with Kinshasa the other day. What we are seeing unfolding, perhaps, Prof, you have been into political science more than I am. There are those of us who feel that President Ruto might be the new Nkrumah. In the sense that Nkrumah was more popular outside Ghana than he was in Ghana. And somebody said perhaps he could easily have become the president of Africa and did not become a very good president of Ghana. But that is yet to be seen. And also, we need to recognize the fact that in the power plays of world politics, friends, truth be told, Kenya is a subordinate, as it were. And it is normally Moses who goes to the mountain, but not the other way. So we have to be in Italy if we have inclined to the west, we have to be in Italy, we have to be in London, we have to be in Washington when they call. That's a reality. That's realpolitik, if you, as we say in international relations. That's the pragmatism that comes with the game that is dominated, quote unquote, by the big boys. Washington, London, Rome, and the rest of the capitals of the world. So
Right.
we are underdogs, and we need to play it like underdogs.
Right. I just want to refer to an editorial that was there in December the 1st, 2023, and they were talking about explain Saudi oil claim. And this was in the Daily Nation, and it says, an investigative report alleging that Kenya is among 19 countries that Saudi Arabia is using to push its fossil fuel agenda is disturbing. It casts aspersions on our country's integrity on a matter of vital importance, that is climate change. The countries have always unequivocally supported the development of clean energy as a means of fighting global warming. But if Kenya is indeed guilty as charged, then most probably a formal pitch has not been made, and that if it ever comes, the government should reject it. The Middle East oil-producing giant reportedly planned to fight the phasing out of fossil fuels by financing and setting up high-carbon infrastructure projects across the continent. The investigation by journalists from the Center for Climate Reporting alleges that Kenya is one of the countries chosen for inclusion in the Arabian Kingdom's oil sustainability program. It is said to be meant to tie these countries to Saudi oil imports. Although we need to build airports, roads and ports, these infrastructural projects should not be tied to a clandestine deal that will undermine the development of a clean energy and reserve climate change mitigation gains. We need the government's assurance that no such schemes will be entertained. The investigators cite President William Ruto's 3 visits to Saudi Arabia since he came to power just a year ago as an indication that something of the sort could be in the pipeline. Ironically, earlier this year, President Ruto said Kenya had received carbon credits from Saudi firms to fund clean cooking and solar home system. Nothing prevents Saudis or any other country from investing in Kenya, but not to our detriment. It should be for mutual gain. The damning revelations comes as the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP28, is being held in Dubai. And of course, this was then in December. So hearing such an editorial statement in light of what we're talking, Andy's tour, him now as the chair of that caucus of climate change in Africa, what does that portend?
Well,
is it Yusuf? Or sequentially, before you come to you? It's you. You can comment on that particular statement I just read.
Well, I think there are relationships that countries have. And in this particular case, I think the Kenya's particular need at that time in engagement with Saudi Arabia was to get fuel at a critical time when, in fact, the country was facing a problem, shortage and lack of foreign currency to purchase. And I think countries do agree there is a, tit for tat. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. And in this particular case, I don't see any problem. But
so we bend over our principles, even if it's tit for tat.
It's not a question of
that we have a policy.
It's a question of interest. You must differentiate. And also to this idea that, in fact, African leaders are some kind of hopeless, weak characters that cannot make decisions that are in their best interest is also condescending in some ways, because we also have an interest. You go to Rome, the president goes to Rome, not because he feels that Italy has a special relationship with Kenya, or Italy is such a big economy that you need their service. There's something that Italy needs and we need. We exchange. For example, Italy has facilities here in Malindi. Yes. Italy has been involved in funding some of our projects, like the dams, the 2 infamous dams. And the president obviously would be interested to revive and make sure that those dams are built, because they have been part of his political program. So it's not as if you're bending backwards or you've been manipulated. It is you're looking for your own interest. And Africa has an interest. Africa has an interest. Africa has leadership that wants something from other countries. So it is give and take. It's not as if we're simply a puppet in that particular process. And I don't see any contradiction, given the fact that, in fact, the president has articulated his position on climate change, renewable energy, so many times at so many forums. I have absolutely no doubt that the fact that he is committed to renewable energy. He's committed to a change in our relationship, in our equal relationship with other countries. He would like to have a powerful Kenya. He would like to have a powerful Africa. And he is a voice now. I think the most articulate and the most powerful voice of an African leader. He does not believe in this idea of, he's not an ideologue in the like Kwame Nkrumah or Jamal Abdel Nasser or Julius Nyerere. He's a pragmatic person. He's not restricted by ideology. I think, for example, Kwame Nkrumah was a Marxist, and the president is a liberal person, and his policies have tilted towards neoliberalism. Whether Marxism is more Pan-Africanist than neoliberalism or not is a debate for another matter, another time.
You want to say something and we'll wind up on it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what is in the pipeline or in the pipe hole with the Saudi deal. What, of course, is important is, Kenya will always have to pursue its national interest in the way in which it sees fit. And the president may change a number of things, here and there, depending on how that goes. But when we're striking deals with foreign countries, for instance, I think what is important is for us to study whatever proposals that are coming from them. Because when we're so quick, perhaps for a photo op opportunity, to say we've done ABC, that is when we get in trouble. And if in fact that is the path that Kenya has taken, then it won't be the first country to make that mistake. And that is where leadership becomes important, that any proposal needs to be studied extensively. But secondly, we have desires as a country when it comes to renewable energy. And the president has pretty much been a global champion, for green, energy. Now, I'm caring less about what he may say or what, whether it sounds contradictory, but more about what we are doing here at home. Are we doing things that are in line with what we are communicating to the rest of the world? Do we have a framework to actualize these desires? Because if we don't, they're going to remain aspirational. They're going to remain a fantasy. Now, coming back home, how are we dealing with our current resources? Yes, there is coal apparently in Kenya somewhere. Perhaps that's another path maybe the president was talking about in terms of clean coal technology. Now it's there to make sure it does not really pollute, the entire world. Like we should not be able to grow at any cost. But even when people raise reservations about the desire for instance, at developing countries to tap into some of these non-renewables, a lot of those countries are not ready to commit fully. We're still waiting for 100 billion on climate financing, which was promised. Of course, it's not been released. And so, as a country, I think how we're dealing with our local environment in terms of what we are preaching to the world becomes important. Now, I'm yet to see, perhaps this panel may be aware, a framework in terms of real environmental conservation in this country, in protecting not just our forests, but ensuring we significantly and consistently increase vegetation. The president may have good intentions and we have an international tree planting day and we go out there and do that. But we realize that our villages are literally drying out. Our wells have disappeared. Our springs that used to flow are no longer there. The rivers, even those of us come from the North Rift, the Cherangani River is literally, right now there's less and less water. The one that feeds into, the Nzoia, you see. And so what exactly are we doing to actually ensure that we move in this direction? 3, we know that countries such as Japan and others have assisted us in building our geothermal capacity. But how much resources are we committing as a country in that direction? For instance, energy in Kenya is one of the most expensive in the region, and that discourages investment, and kills the economy. And so what is critical is what actual policies do we have internally in here that can actually speak to these larger goals that we're also trying to share with the rest of the world.
All right. You wanted to say something? Someone is actually saying, George is saying, please correct what Yusuf Hassan is saying about Kwame Nkrumah. He wasn't a Marxist, as you put it. That he was a colonist. That was a colonist way of mudslinging anyone who stood against neocolonialism in Africa. This is a libel against a gallant African leader, he says.
I didn't know it was a crime to be a Marxist.
Nkrumah actually answered that question himself. I think it was in 1960, if I'm not wrong. A young journalist asked him whether he was going east or west. And he said, young man, we are not either going east nor west, we are going forward.
We go forward.
We go forward.
Okay,
but that was not my main contribution I wanted to make. I made that because of what
I want us just to wrap up on this so that we can go to other issues.
Give me a minute, I say what... the statement you read suggested that Kenya is singing somebody else's song. And also coupled with the fact that we have become a darling of the West. But as Honorable Hassan said, the president seems to me to be a realist. What works for him at a given time, he will say it and say it very eloquently, and then we will take care of the consequences if and when they emerge. But overall, with such a realist approach, whether there are dividends or not, of course, it will bring us into confrontation with a number of interests within even the East African region. So how Nairobi is going to manage that with the stance that the president has taken, particularly with renewable energy, will determine very much the direction, for example, the EAC will take, the direction IGAD will take. Look at one country has pulled out of IGAD already. The situation in West Africa is fairly rough and noisy. 3 countries are threatening to pull out of ECOWAS. So regionalism in Africa is being threatened actually by countries that are pursuing a very pro-Western approach to their foreign policy. The whole problem in West Africa probably revolves around the issues of the leader of ECOWAS. So I think we need to call for some kind of moving back and thinking more than talking.
I want to just, as we're winding up on this, because earlier, I think last year we were discussing also this issue of climate change, where Kenya was conceding millions of hectares of UAE farm in the latest carbon offset deal. Just to read a bit of it, it says, Dubai-based firm Blue Carbon has signed a framework of collaboration with Kenya. That was last year's Kenya State Department of Environment and Climate Change that will concede millions of hectares of its territory for the production of carbon credits. The credits will be generated supposedly from restoring and protecting the land, and the company will then sell this on to major polluters to offset their emissions. This follows a slew, as it says, of similar contracts with Liberia, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, which conceded 7.5 million hectares, a fifth of its land mass, to the company. Cumulatively, the deal concedes near blanket control over a total area of 24.5 million hectares, encompassing land inhabited and used by local communities. In the case of Liberia, this will override Liberian land laws that oblige developers to obtain free prior consent from communities. The FOC with Kenya closely follows $1.5 billion memorandum of understanding signed by Blue Carbon parents company Global Carbon Investments with Harare, which a press release states pre-financing of carbon credits in Zimbabwe. Let me just not read the whole of it. Then we had the president actually responding to this particular statement, because questions were raised. Where was this deal done? And we are not aware about it. And so the president also just, let me try and retrieve that particular, what he said, as we take a short break, that Kenya has not sold an inch of land to carbon credit dealers, Ruto swears. And it says Kenya has not sold an inch of its land to any carbon credit company. President William Ruto has said, dismissing reports the Dubai-based firm Blue Carbon 3 weeks ago, that was last year, signed a framework of collaboration with Kenya's State Department of Environment. It just goes to show what I'm talking about, that something is happening there, and here we're denying, or we are actually starkly not in agreement with that. In terms of communications also, of these dealings, of these negotiations, as you're saying, it seems also to be wanting with this particular administration. We'll circle back with that as well. And also what we had in the Standard yesterday regarding IMF warning bailouts condition that it could spark Kenya's civil unrest. It's been running by your screen. It says the measures taken to balance government finances could spawn Arab Spring-like protests. What does it really portend for our security here in the country? Oops, it just jumped to the other page. I will retrieve that for you. We take a short break.